Picture this: James Bond, Dirty Harry, and the Joker all sitting on the same company board. It sounds like the setup for a joke, but it actually happened, and the company they were trying to save didn't make movies. It made golf clubs. This is the strange, star-studded story of how three of the biggest names in Hollywood history couldn't stop one of America's most beloved golf brands from falling apart. And believe it or not, the celebrities weren't even the strangest part of this story. Before any actors ever got involved, Lynx started with two men who genuinely knew how to build a golf club. In 1971, a man named John Riley Sr. left his job at Ping, where he had spent more than a decade helping design some of the earliest cavity back irons in the golf industry. Riley teamed up with Carl Ross, a former sales manager at the Arnold Palmer Golf Company, and together they formed a new company called Golf Lynx. Riley brought the technical know-how. He understood tooling, weighting, and the fine details that separated a decent club from a great one. Ross brought the sales experience and the connections. On paper, it was a perfect partnership. In practice, it didn't last long. Within about a year, Riley was gone from the company he had just helped create. The full details of the split were never made public, but Riley moved on to found his own ventures, eventually patenting one of the very first fully metal drivers in golf history. It was a bitter irony. The man who helped build Lynx never got to see what it became. Now here is a little detail that most golfers have never heard. Nobody is entirely certain where the name Lynx actually came from. The easy explanation is that it's simply a play on the word links, as in a golf links course. But there is another theory floating around golf history circles that is a lot more interesting. Decades earlier, a British car company based in Coventry, England, had produced a small sports roadster called the Riley Lynx, built by the very same Riley family name, though there's no confirmed direct connection to John Riley himself. Around the same era, two former Ford employees had also started an open-wheeled race car company using the Lynx name. Whether any of that history actually inspired the golf company's name is impossible to say for certain, but it's a fun little mystery buried inside a much bigger one. Carl Ross stayed behind after Riley's departure and kept building the company. And here is where the real story begins to take shape. In the 1970s, most of the major golf manufacturers, companies like Wilson and McGregor, were still forging their clubs the old-fashioned way, heating and hammering metal into shape one piece at a time. It was slow, expensive, and hard to repeat with consistency. Lynx, much like its rival Ping, bet everything on a newer process called investment casting, where molten metal is poured into a mold to create a precise, repeatable club head. In 1972, Lynx released its master model iron, one of the earliest examples of an investment cast iron reaching everyday golfers rather than just the pros. It was a small company taking a massive risk on new technology, and remarkably, it worked. The big manufacturers eventually had no choice but to follow. Through the rest of the 1970s and into the 1980s, Lynx quietly became one of the most respected names in golf equipment, known among serious players even if it never became a household name outside the sport. Then came the moment that changed everything for the company. A young golfer named Fred Couples started playing Lynx clubs, and as his career rose through the ranks of professional golf, so did the reputation of the brand carrying his bag. By the time Couples won the Masters in 1992, wearing that unmistakable easy swing that made him a fan favorite, Lynx clubs were suddenly associated with one of the most popular players in the sport. 2 years later, in 1994, Ernie Els added another major trophy to the Lynx name, winning the U.S. Open swinging a set of Lynx Parallax irons. For a company that had started with just two guys in a small workshop, this was the absolute peak. Two major champions in 2 consecutive years, both playing your equipment. It doesn't get much better than that in the golf business. But peaks in business rarely last forever, and Lynx was no exception. By the mid-1990s, ownership of the company had changed hands, and it was now part of a larger industrial holding group called Zurn. Zurn was watching the golf industry closely, and one particular deal caught its full attention. A rival club maker named Cobra had just been sold to Acushnet, the company behind Titleist, for a staggering $700 million. Zurn looked at Lynx, a respected brand with back-to-back major championship wins to its name, and figured it could command a similarly enormous price. High hopes were set across the boardroom. What happened next was anything but ordinary. Instead of a traditional corporate buyer, an unusual group of investors stepped forward. It was assembled by a Los Angeles accountant and a California businessman, and led in spirit, if not officially on paper, by Fred Couples himself, the very golfer whose success had helped make the brand desirable in the first place. Joining Couples on this new ownership team were his old college friend and future television broadcaster Jim Nantz, basketball legend Jerry West, tennis champion Pete Sampras, radio personality Rick Dees, famous for the novelty hit song Disco Duck, and three men who needed absolutely no introduction anywhere in the world: Clint Eastwood, Sean Connery, and Jack Nicholson. Think about that lineup for a moment. The man who played James Bond, the man behind Dirty Harry, and the man who brought the Joker and Jack Torrance to life on screen. All of them, along with some of the biggest names in professional sports, now owned a piece of a golf club manufacturer. It's worth noting that both Eastwood and Connery were genuine, lifelong golf lovers off camera as well, not just casual investors chasing a trend. The purchase price for the entire company was reported to be around $25 million, which was actually less than what the company was worth on paper at the time. It looked, on the surface, like an incredible bargain. It looked like the beginning of something special. The new ownership group relocated Lynx's operations to Carlsbad, California, right in the heart of the golf equipment industry, alongside many of its biggest competitors. For a brief moment, it must have felt like nothing could possibly go wrong. A championship-winning brand, star power that ordinary business money simply couldn't buy, and a fresh start in a brand new location. Surely, with this much talent and this much fame behind it, the brand was unstoppable. But here is the part of the story that so many people miss when they hear about celebrities buying a company. Being famous and being skilled at running a manufacturing business are two completely different things. None of these celebrities, for all their talent in front of a camera or on a court, had any real experience running a golf equipment company, managing a factory, or navigating the brutal economics of the sporting goods industry. Decisions slowed down inside the boardroom. Direction became unclear. And while a board full of household names was still figuring out how a company like this actually operated day to day, the rest of the golf world kept moving without them. Ernie Els eventually left Lynx for TaylorMade. Fred Couples himself, the man who had helped assemble this entire ownership group in the first place, later switched to using a Callaway driver on tour. When your own founder and biggest star stops using your product, that tells you almost everything you need to know about where a company is headed. The tour players who had helped build the Lynx name in the first place were quietly walking away, one by one. Then 1998 arrived, and it turned into one of the worst years the golf industry had seen in a long time. On the surface, everything looked fine. Tiger Woods was already a superstar, having won the Masters the year before, and golf's popularity seemed to be at an all-time high. But underneath that surface, an economic storm was brewing. A weather pattern known as El Niño disrupted golf course play across huge parts of the country, and a financial crisis sweeping through Asia rattled global markets and consumer spending. The largest manufacturers, companies like Callaway, Cobra, Ping, and TaylorMade, were big enough and strong enough to weather the storm. Together, that so-called Big Four controlled roughly 75% of the entire golf equipment market. Lynx, a smaller second-tier company already struggling with unclear leadership, simply did not have that same cushion to fall back on. With debt mounting and the brand losing its footing fast, Lynx management reached out to a respected industry figure named Barney Adams, hoping to work out a merger with his growing company, Adams Golf. It felt like one last realistic chance at survival, but Adams set a condition before he would even consider it. He insisted the only way he would agree to run the combined company was if the celebrity board of directors was fully disbanded and stepped aside completely. The board refused. The deal collapsed before it ever really began. Without that lifeline, the end came quickly. Lynx laid off 2/3 of its entire workforce, a devastating blow to the employees who had spent years building clubs on the factory floor, long before any of this celebrity drama had entered the picture. In mid-July of 1998, the company defaulted on a loan worth $3.4 million. Just 2 weeks later, Lynx filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company that had once outfitted back-to-back major championship winners, the company backed by James Bond and Dirty Harry themselves, was now legally insolvent. What happened next felt almost like a final insult. Lynx was folded into a company called Golfsmith, alongside other struggling brands of the era. Instead of championship irons in the hands of major winners, Lynx became just another line of inexpensive starter sets sitting on retail store shelves, aimed at beginners rather than the tour professionals who had once made the name famous. It was a quiet, almost forgettable ending for a brand that had once meant something significant to serious golfers everywhere. And yet, remarkably, the Lynx story did not completely disappear. Years later, in the United Kingdom, a husband and wife team named Steve Elford and Stephanie Zinser took over licensing rights to the brand starting in 2011 and fully acquired the European trademark outright by 2013. Under their guidance, Lynx slowly rebuilt itself into a respected, growing name across the United Kingdom and Europe, adding double-digit sales growth year after year. In a touching moment that connected the entire story full circle, Elford once received a personal letter from Carl Ross himself, the original co-founder of the company back in 1971, by then semi-retired and working as a realtor in Nevada. Ross had been quietly watching the new owners rebuild the brand he started and wanted them to know how proud he was of how they were representing it. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Golfsmith itself eventually collapsed into its own bankruptcy in 2017, and its assets, including the Lynx trademark, were purchased by the retail giant Dick's Sporting Goods. 2 years later, in 2019, those American rights to the Lynx name were acquired once again by independent ownership, and the brand officially returned to the United States decades after its Hollywood backboard had lost control of it entirely. It is a strange kind of American story, one that could really only happen in a business as unpredictable as golf. A brand built from nothing by a tooling engineer and a traveling salesman, elevated to the mountaintop by one of golf's most beloved and easygoing champions, and ultimately handed over to a boardroom full of movie stars and sports legends who simply couldn't translate their fame and fortune into the hard, unglamorous work of running a manufacturing business. Money and star power opened every door imaginable. But building golf clubs, running a factory, managing a workforce, and steering a company through a brutal economic storm takes something that no amount of celebrity influence can ever buy. Somewhere out there are still golfers who remember pulling a set of Lynx Parallax irons out of their bag decades ago, never realizing that behind that little cat logo was one of the strangest ownership stories in the history of American manufacturing. If you enjoyed learning the real story behind Lynx Golf, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We dig up the forgotten history behind the brands and factories that so many of us grew up with, and there are plenty more stories just like this one still waiting to be told.